Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution of the United States, an ongoing dialogue and discussion regarding American origins and evolution. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution. I'm Bill O'Brien, and as always, it is a pleasure to be with you today. I thank you so much for giving us some of your valuable time today, and I know that many of you will listen to this program, at a later time, that you're probably recording it, and that is fine, but I have to get used to that kind of a world because, it's obvious that everybody who listens to the program is not listening as the program is actually being broadcast. But I welcome you to today's program. I welcome you to the Virtual Center. I invite you to participate actively in the program by picking up the phone and giving us a call and sharing with us your ideas, your perceptions, your sentiments. The phone number, let me begin by giving you the phone number and my personal email address, and then there's something specific I want to go into about that. Let me begin with the phone number. The phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. My personal email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906, all one word, no punctuation, at gmail.com. I'm going to repeat both the phone number and the email address. But let me give you just kind of an update. I mentioned in a program last week, I believe, the last week, I believe, that one of the things that I was looking at very seriously was developing a website, principally from my perspective, so that we could post documents and you would have a chance to look at the documents before we went on the air, so that the first commentary you heard about the documents would not be the very first exposure that you had to the documents. And so I would like a message board of some kind where I can give you an alert as to where we'll be going and what we'll be doing ahead of time. And that won't necessarily always be the case, but in certain situations it will be. And I think as the weeks and hopefully months go by, and maybe even years, let's be optimistic, that we'll be able to organize the program in such a way that we'll have a certain period of time for presentation and information delivery and commentary, and then we'll have a portion of the program where we can basically turn it over to you, the listening audience, the participants in this. And I think as we develop, that's kind of the direction that we're heading in. And so with that in mind, I wanted to kind of bring you up to date on some of the things that are going on right now that I'm very excited about, and I hope you will be as well. I have been in touch with a good friend who's an attorney here locally, and beginning tomorrow, we will begin the process of incorporating the Virtual Center, to essentially giving it its own incorporation, making it a legal entity, and more important than that, processing the paperwork in order to establish 501c3 status for the center. And what that does is give us the opportunity to raise funds, to apply for grant funding, and to solicit funds from sources, both public and private sources. And the advantage of the 501c3, as many of you I'm sure know, is that it allows those that would make contributions to deduct them on their taxes. Because as a nonprofit 501c3 entity, this gives us a much broader and more more positive, more optimistic range of possibilities for securing some sort of funding for the virtual center. And I think the more of that we're able to do, the more variety and the more substance we can build into our programming and into our time together. It'll give us the opportunity to, down the road, long term, it'll give us the opportunity to schedule formal presentations where we can have a number of people, prominent people in the field, making presentations here at the virtual center, which would give you an opportunity to hear different points of view and different perspectives from the people who know. In other words, depending on the availability of funding, the options and the possibilities become much more flexible and much broader, and the whole process becomes much more exciting. So I'm really excited about this, and at the same time, we are beginning the process of developing a website for the virtual center, and I believe that we're heading in the right direction, and a lot of it, very honestly, is due to you, and I mean that your willingness to participate, your enthusiasm in emails that you've sent me, asking questions and making comments about particular issues, all of these things have played a role in my enthusiasm and my desire to push this envelope even further, as it were. And one of the reasons I wanted to mention this today at the very beginning is that once the paperwork is done, once the legal, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, in terms of both the process of incorporation and the application for 501c3 status, then what we anticipate is that we will be looking for funding from some of the major foundations, the ones that would be most likely to support an endeavor like this. And many of the foundations, some of them you would have heard from. We've thrown around a number of name of possible sources of funding. One of them, which is very, very rigorous, but on the other hand very worth pursuing, is the Rockefeller Foundation. To be able to claim that our program, our center, is in part funded by a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, that's the kind of thing we're after, and I think it would add a tremendous amount of credibility to the center, to the programming, and to the quality of the audience that we are able to reach. So one of the things I'm asking you to do, and that's why I mentioned earlier at the outset today that I would be giving you the phone number again, but also my email address, is if you are inclined, I'm asking you to think about this over the next 3 or 4 days or the next week or whatever. But if I'm asking you to think about the programming, what we've been doing here, and what we've been trying to do with the Constitution and with the Supreme Court and the interpretations of the Constitution and all the rest of it. And we'll be pursuing a little bit more on that in today's program. But I'm asking you to think about it, and I'm asking you, if you are so inclined and would like to do this, I would appreciate an email from you, personal email. If you have something substantive that you would like to say about the programming, about the center, about the possibilities, about where we've been so far and where we might go in the future, this would be your commentary, not mine. I'm not at all suggesting or telling you what to say. But as we apply for funding from various foundations, I would like to be able to cite and quote people who have listened to the programs and who have benefited from them, and would be able to give us the kind of personal support that we would want in an application for funding, especially if that funding was to be significant. And so, if you are so inclined to do that, I would sure appreciate it. I know we would all appreciate it. It'll enhance our opportunities for securing some funding, which will make the program richer and make the audience it reaches broader and more substantive. And I think that down the road, all of that would benefit the center and benefit those we hope will be touched by the programming we are able to deliver through the center. One of the things we're looking at down the road is video as well as audio interactive capability. As the technology just moves apace, it doesn't wait. It waits for no man, so to speak. And there's no question that the kinds of things that are happening with technology make the potential here greater and greater and greater. And so I think we're into something that is very special and very important. I've said that over and over again. I think the fact that the Head On Radio Network folks, Bob Kincaid and his people, are willing to have been willing to put the center on the air for the last several months is an indication that they do as well. And that I believe we have something important to contribute to the national conversation and to the national dialogue. I believe that the issue at hand, to be very, very blunt about it, I believe the issue at hand is the survival of the republic itself. I think that's what we're dealing with. I think some of that's going to become more evident today in some of the things we'll be covering. So I believe that it's very important that we're here. It's very important that we stay here. It's very important that our message get out. And it's very important that we are able to incorporate the latest in technology and equipment in such a way that we can bring the best, most up-to-date, and highest quality information and perspective to you, the listeners. I really believe that what we have here is the beginnings of something that is very, very important in our total national conversation. I think citizenship demands it. I think the republic is going to fall or prevail based on the quality of its citizens. And I think that what we potentially can do here for upgrading what our citizens know and what they believe about our republic is very, very important. It's very important to sustain. And on this end, I want you to know that we're doing everything we can do to sustain it. And we want to give you an opportunity to participate and be part of it. So again, I'll mention this again next week in our programs as well. But if you are inclined to share with us a comment or a statement or something that you feel potential funders ought to know about the program, and I don't mean just it's a wonderful program and blah 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 blah, but if you've got something that's substantive, something that we might have done on a program or a series of programs or whatever that you found really, really helpful and really rewarding, we would sure love to hear about it. And I mean that. So again, my email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And as far as your active participation in the program today, we invite you to give us a call, area code 304-658-3333. That's 658-3333, area code 304. I want to touch a little bit on where we were yesterday and move from that. If you remember yesterday, I thought it was a very, very interesting program because we touched on a number of issues, and one of them was the issue of say that word fast 10 times, epistemology, the study of knowledge, and basically trying to get our handle or our arms around exactly what we know and what we don't know and how we know it, how we learn, basically. And what we talked about yesterday was basically that there are two general schools of thought related to this, empirical knowledge, empiricism, and rationalism. And these are very, very significant. Empiricism is based on the idea that knowledge is attained through experience, through learning, through the environment, in the lab, through experimentation, the scientific method, all of these things. And, of course, those who are and I think we could say, as a general statement, we could say that those who are professional, whose profession are in the area of math and sciences, who are in the area of looking for specific answers to questions and looking for and kind of relying on the value and the security of numbers and experimentation. Those people who believe that if you can't reproduce it in the laboratory, if you can't weigh it, if you can't hold it, if you can't, touch it or whatever, then it doesn't exist. I mean, that's kind of an extreme, but there's no question that that's the direction we're coming from. And then there is the argument, the idea of rationalism, and that is that man's ability to reason, man's mind, will generate the kinds of ideas and the kinds of insights which will bring him to the kind of knowledge that he could get no other way. And as we know, the debates that seem to engulf society traditionally are the debates as to whether we learn more one way or the other way. We realize, I think, as more and more research is done, we're becoming much more aware that man knows, man learns increasingly from both. And the issue as to how you strike a balance, as to what that balance might be, it seems to me is very, very important. There's absolutely no question, for example, that, and I think this is significant, that the writings of John Locke and the writings of Kant and David Hume and we could go on and on, Descartes and his meditations, David Hume and his treatise on human nature, Immanuel Kant and his critique of pure reason, and of course John Locke, and we've mentioned this before, his essay concerning human understanding. All of these kind of give us some substance into the Enlightenment idea of rationalism, the idea that man's reason is the key, is a key, that God gave man reason, God gave man a mind, and and God expects man to use that mind in order to discover truth and to enhance knowledge. And we touched a little bit, if you remember, on the difference between atheists and theists. Those who believe in God or a higher power and those who don't. And generally, those who don't tend to be in the empiricism school, where knowledge comes from experience and the scientific method and experimentation and all the rest of it. And there's no question that those who believe in a higher power, who believe in a God or a divine being or a maker, a creator, are much more inclined toward the idea of rationalism, that within man himself are the skills, and these folks tend to put much more stock in intuition, in religion and faith, in tradition, in the past, in history, and all the rest of it. And the assumption is that because certain traditions have prevailed through generation after generation, the very fact that they have prevailed and they seem to answer the kinds of questions that man brings to the table through all these periods and all these different eras, to many people that's enough evidence to show that they are true, that there is real substance there. And so we talked about that a little bit. And what we didn't say, and I thought of this after we went off the air yesterday, but I just wanted to make a comment. It's very obvious that if you read the founders, if you look at the Constitution of the United States, if you look at the writings of Madison and Jefferson and some of the other founders, it's very obvious that many of them are wrestling with these same questions as we are today. We continue to wrestle with the same questions that the founders wrestled with. And so in the past here at the center, we've shared quotations from Madison and others. We've shared quotations from Jefferson and others, which suggests that that at a particular point in time, Jefferson seemed to be leading more in one direction than the other, and much of the debate, much of the interplay in the letters exchanged between Madison and Jefferson are very, very revealing, because they get into these issues. There's absolutely no question that that Madison is much more into the idea that experience is the key. There's no question that Madison believes, and I believe, in trying to understand a little bit about the origins of the Constitution and the political system we live in, the nature of our republic as the founders envisioned it. There's absolutely no question that the founders believed that what we needed to have, or what we needed to look for from our citizens, was in large part going to be produced by the kind of political environment we created here, the kind of education we provided for our citizens, the kind of political system that we adopted, the ingredients of that political system in order to make it work. The founders believed, Madison believed especially, that that the nature of the environment within the political environment within which you created produced, at least in part, the kind of people that you wanted, the proper kinds of citizens. There's no question, for example, that Benjamin Rush believed that in his mode of education proper in a republic. I mean, his whole strategy, his whole thesis in that essay is the idea that a republic demands a certain kind of person, a certain kind of citizen. It demands a certain level of virtue and honesty and willing to put the public interest first. And if we're going to demand it from our citizens, if the republic requires it, then we have to make sure that our citizens can deliver it. And the way you do that is you do that through your educational system. And you educate people in such a way that they become players in this play, in this political process that we are creating. And so they believe that the kinds of virtue and the kinds of considerations and willingness. Or if you remember, Benjamin Rush made the comment that the best, there's no question that the best people, the best citizens in a republic are Christians, because the values of Christianity fit so very well into the needs and values of the republic. And Rush lays that out very clearly, to the point that he even suggests that Scripture itself ought to be the basis of the way children learn in school. They ought to get their moral lessons and their ethical lessons from Scripture, from the Bible. And again, Rush made the point that because Christianity emphasizes things like tolerance and willingness to accept differences, and the need to get along, and the golden rule, the idea that if you expect to be treated a certain way, you have to treat others the certain way, that same way, and all of these things, because that is the essence of Christianity. That to Benjamin Rush meant that Christianity was the best way to educate our citizens. So these people obviously believed that empiricism was the way people learned, that the kind of people you wanted to produce was directly dependent on the nature of the political environment within which they grew and developed. Took a reflection break there. And I think, just as an observation, I think it's very, very important to realize this, because if you develop that case, if you look at the writings of Madison or Benjamin Rush or some of the other founders, John Adams and some of the others, there's no question that you can make that case. There's absolutely no question. Where this becomes difficult is that if you accept the fact that that case is valid, if you believe that these people were predominantly empiricists, at least many of them were, then it seems to me that you almost owe it, as you interpret the Constitution and as you try to understand the Constitution, you are almost duty-bound to follow through on that thesis. For example, if you look at James Madison's, look at the Federalist Papers, and especially Madison's Federalist 10 and Federalist 51, and what he talks about with factions and how you create stability and security within this political system, within the Republic. Madison's idea, not just idea, Madison's belief that human nature can be defined in a certain way. When Madison says that factions are sown in the nature of man, he's telling us something very important. He's basically suggesting that human nature can only be understood when you accept the fact that man is self-interested. And man is going to look out for his own interests first. And you can't expect man to put aside his self-interests in favor of something called the public interest unless you teach him to do it, unless you make it worthwhile for him to do it. So I think that's very important. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you think about what Madison wrote about in Federalist 10 and Federalist 51 about factions, about the fact that they are sown in the nature of man, if you accept the fact that the security and stability of the Republic is going to be dependent not on the elimination of factions, but on the promotion of factions, the existence of factions. The very existence of a multiplicity of factions is going to guarantee the security of the state of this republic, provided you create a system in such a way where you pit, as he says in Federalist 51, you pit ambition against ambition. And what you basically do is create a sense of inertia, where you pit force against force, self-interest against self-interest, group against group. And the security of the society, of the system itself, depends on the free operation of these factions. The point I'm making here is that a system which Madison designs to deal with the reality of factions becomes, in essence, the environment within which citizen behavior is defined and explained. People who grow up in a system based on this idea of human nature and self-interest are going to become exactly what the system demands. In other words, the environment is going to produce the nature of the citizens that the Republic requires. So, in a sense, what we're saying is Madison believes that the system he designed in the Constitution is necessary to deal with the reality of factions which are sown into the nature of man. This is human nature. This is the way people really are. And I think if you talk to people, the most committed people to the nature of our political system, they will acknowledge that the reason our Constitution, our political system, has been able to last as long as it has is because it's the only system in the world which is designed to deal with people the way people really are. But the fact of the matter is that if you set up a system based on those assumptions and those priorities, and if you are an empiricist, then in effect you are producing the very citizens that system needs in order to sustain it. By raising citizens and educating them in a political system based on these assumptions, you are in essence defining the knowledge that your citizens accept without question. A system designed to deal with man the way he really is becomes a system that creates the kind of people that the system itself needs to have. Translation, or elaborate a little bit further, if you believe, as Madison did, that human nature is driven principally by self-interest, then if you create a political system based on that reality, then you are going to produce citizens who are committed to and believe that pursuing their own self-interest is the number one priority. I would suggest to you, if you don't believe that, think about why people go to college, why people go to school, why there is this debate about education being quality education being the way to get a good job. Why is it that people are willing to go into serious debt and to devote 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 years of their lives getting degrees, educational degrees, because they believe that there's a payoff on the other end. They believe the realities of free enterprise. They believe that investing in the future will have a payoff. And so, in a sense, the system created to deal with a definition of reality produces the very reality that the system demands. And I think that's why this empiricism, rationalism stuff, these different approaches to epistemology, to the study of knowledge and how people learn, is so important. Because what you subscribe to as to what people know and what they learn defines pretty well what you are. And the point I'm trying to make is this stuff is so important, and that our republic is so dependent on the nature of the citizens in it, that it becomes absolutely critical that our people know more about this system and what makes it function. No longer can we trust to the fact that the system will prosper because people are indoctrinated to believe in it even though they don't understand it. There's clearly a fear, there's been a fear, that people can only know so much, that the people, the masses, can only be trusted to know so much. While those at the top, those that we hope will be making the decisions, the best educated, the wealthiest, and all the rest of it, they can know more. And because they're the ones that basically make the decisions that will determine whether the system prevails or doesn't prevail. So, that's why I think these issues are so very, very important. I think we could, and I think much traditional or terrestrial talk radio does this all the time, is focus on these issues of atheists and theists and whether in fact there is a God or not, and these kinds of questions. And they're based on the assumption that indeed, there is, and the system is based on it and all the rest of it. I think this is very, very important stuff. But again, I don't think we can basically engage in any kind of discussion that's going to that absolutely solve the question as to whether there is a creator or not a creator. I don't envision that at all. But as far as knowledge, and as far as adding to people's knowledge and understanding of the nature of the political system within which we live, I think that's very important. So again, we're back to the very same question we've touched on so many times in the past, the issue of the way we educate our young, the nature of our education system. And again, I know I mentioned yesterday, in yesterday's program, I mentioned that 1816 tax on foreign books in order to shield American youngsters from dangerous foreign ideas. And what we are confronted with here are two major approaches to education in this country. One is that the only way you can educate the masses is to control what they believe. And the other is that true education is teaching the kinds of skills and exposing people to the kinds of activities which are going to allow them to develop their own intellectual skills and abilities so that they can pursue truth and knowledge for themselves. And I think those two major issues really encapsulate very well the debate over our education system. And I would suggest to you that if you look at the history of education in this country, it is very clear that this nation has never really been willing to accept the latter approach to education. We've been much more inclined to go in the direction of Benjamin Rush, that you teach people certain definitions of truth, and ultimately the result is once you control what people believe, they will begin to act in accordance with that belief system, and they will be exactly the kinds of citizens that you want. That Mode of Education Proper in a Republic essay seems to me to define the realities of the education system that we have adopted in this nation from the beginning and that we have pursued with little deviation from it ever since then. Now, we're talking about education for the masses. We're not talking about education for the few, and this is I think, something that is very important. So the question is, if we believe, and I do, that the future prosperity of this republic is going to be directly related to our willingness to begin to educate more and more people to devote their lives to the pursuit of knowledge and truth for themselves, rather than continue to be told what's true and what's not true and what to believe and what not to believe by somebody else. If you believe that that's the answer, and that is clearly where I'm coming from, then it seems to me that you've got to follow through by integrating or beginning to do certain things in your education system that heretofore we've been unwilling or reluctant to do. And one of them is the issue of argumentation. And we talked about this. We've talked about this off and on for the last few days. And I don't want to go into a long harangue about it, but I did mention that one of our listeners sent me a wonderful article from the Huffington Post, I believe, on the importance of argument in the way we educate our children, because how we deal with argumentation, how we deal with argument, has a direct effect on the kinds of critical thinking skills that our students have. And so, if I can, I wanted to share with you some of the major conclusions or the major suggestions or themes in this article, and we can pursue it from there. It begins with some research, and I think this is substantive. And there's all sorts of sources in here of what places that you can go in order to get documentation for these findings. Only a fraction of graduating high school seniors, 6% of 12th graders. This is research done in 2005. Only 6% of 12th graders can make informed critical judgments about written text. That's one of the findings done from reached from research done in 2005. This problem, according to this article, this problem applies to both reading and writing. Only 15% of 12th graders demonstrate the proficiency to write well-organized essays that consist of clear arguments. Our people don't know how to develop an argument. They don't know how to use evidence. They don't know how to present evidence. Many of them are unable to separate or to distinguish between fact and opinion. In fact, many of our young people have been convinced by others that because this is America and because in America everybody's equal, that means that your opinions are as good as everybody else's opinions. And if you believe that your opinions are fact, then think of what the result of that is. And so this article makes the point that critical thinking and argument skills, the abilities to both generate and critique arguments, are critical elements in decision-making itself. Argumentation promotes long-term understanding and helps students retain content. There's absolutely no question that if the content you are exposed to in your education experience is merely fact upon fact upon fact, and I'm struck here by the very famous quote from Dickens's Hard Times. If you've ever read Hard Times, you know that the book opens in Mr. Gradgrind's, what a wonderful name, Gradgrind, Mr. Gradgrind's classroom, in which he is lecturing his students on the importance of facts. And so the transmission of facts, of information, from teacher to student, is the definition of the kind of education that our young people get. And what the research shows is that there's no way in the world that young people can retain information, especially the amount of information that they receive in their total education experience, unless they are given the opportunity to do something with those facts, do something with that information. And so whether they understand it, whether they retain it, whether they can remember it, all of these things depend on what students are asked to do with what information they are given. There's all sorts of research to show that. And you can go all the way back into the ancients. The Greeks believed that dialogue, conversation, argument and counter-argument was the basis for what they believed was the most advanced form of thought. The process of taking a position and being willing to allow others to respond substantively to that position, to argue against it, and your ability to counter the counter-argument, all of that enhances the understanding and the ability and broadens the scope of the individuals. And the Greeks believed that that's really the highest form of education. And so we are led to believe that the educational method, the use of dialogue, the so-called Socratic method, the idea of Socrates, if you've read the Republic, in which Plato engages in these dialogues and these backs and forth, these arguments and counter-arguments, and this is your premise. Do you accept this? Yes. Well, if you accept that, then you must accept this. And basically what happens is that one's understanding of the subject at hand continues to expand and grow with that process. Our education system is effectively empty of any of that. We don't give our young people an opportunity to understand that or to do it, and part of the reason is because basically we don't know how to do it. We are a society which approaches education from the point of view the last thing we want to do is encourage discord and argument. The whole purpose of education is to create consensus, is to tell people exactly what we want them to know and believe. And how successfully we do it is determined by testing students to make sure that they all end up with the right answers. So our whole education system is not driven by the pursuit of truth. It is driven by the belief that we already have it. And the education system is society's way to transmit truth to people who as yet don't have it, the young. The Puritans, one of the most fascinating things, to read the sermons of Cotton Mather and John Cotton, his father. And the extent to which they look at children as empty vessels. And the purpose of society and the purpose of the teacher and the purpose of parents is to fill minds with truth. And the basic assumption, and they don't just assume this, they say it. The danger is that Satan seeks to control the minds and the behavior of the young. And if society doesn't fill the young mind with truth, the devil will fill young minds with falsehood. So the nature of education, public education, is absolutely critical because it's absolutely important that children are exposed to truth before those with untruths have an opportunity to reach them. The ministers said this over and over and over again. You can read the sermons. They are available online. And you begin to get the idea that that's really what education is about. The assumption is, the belief is, that man is a fallen creature, as with original sin, Adam and Eve, the whole Christian background. And the belief is that human nature is evil. People are self-interested. They are never public interested. They are not naturally virtuous. They are naturally sinners. And the responsibility that God has thrust upon society is to raise the young according to the tenets or the will of the Creator. And the only way you can do it is to fill their heads with truth before somebody else fills their heads with falsehood. And I would suggest to you that's the model of our education system. It continues to be, to a large degree, the model of our education system. There is absolutely there's nothing to be surprised at. It absolutely makes perfect sense that Massachusetts, that was settled by the Puritans who believed these things, passes the first public school law in the New World, 1842, the Massachusetts School Law. In fact, it is usually referred to as that old deluder Satan law. Look it up on Google. Just Google that old deluder Satan, and you'll get a copy of the 1842 legislation passed by the Massachusetts General Court, the legislature, mandating that every child be publicly educated, that every community have a school, and every community hire and pay an instructor. And the purpose of the instructor is to fill these empty vessels, these young people, with truth before that old deluder Satan has an opportunity to expose them to falsehood and evil, because that's what the devil is committed to. And from the very beginning, that's what public education in this nation is about. And if you accept the fact, and I do, that our education system, to a degree at least, has never veered very far from that model, then you can understand why things like dialogue and argumentation and critical thinking don't fit that scheme. They don't seem to have a place in that particular frame of reference. We are not turning out students who are skilled in questioning. We are turning out students who are skilled in mastering what it is they are to believe, what it is they must know. That becomes the model of our education system. So as we look at all of the research in this article about argumentation, and the title of it, by the way, let me share with you the title because I think it's very revealing. A Society with Poor Critical Thinking Skills, the Case for Argument in Education. And it's just chock full of research done in the early 21st century about what our youngsters can't do and can't do well. One sentence here that I want to share with you. Epistemological understanding, and we know now what that is. It's the study of knowledge itself. Epistemological understanding becomes most evident when an individual is confronted with uncertain or controversial knowledge claims. Students develop their critical thinking skills when they are confronted with information which contradicts what they believe. If the education system continually feeds them piece after piece of information which reinforces what they already believe, then they may end up with their beliefs being stronger, but they don't graduate with their education and intellectual skills any stronger. There's no opportunity to develop their intellectual abilities and skills if the only things that they are exposed to are things that they already know and already believe. So what research has done is focus on high school students, and that research shows, this is research done in 1997, a positive correlation between educational level and epistemological level. Cross-sectional studies demonstrate that educational experiences influence epistemological development, and that it is the quality of education and not age or gender that contributes to different developmental levels of epistemological understanding. Education is the key. Argument is a more complex and challenging cognitive skill for students than other kinds of reading and writing, such as exposition or narrative. I want to focus on that for a second. How much of the writing, and again, our students don't write that much because the argument is our teachers are responsible for so many students that they can't read what too many students would write. So they're almost forced to give short answer and multiple choice tests rather than writing assignments because they can't handle the grading. But something else is going on here besides the time it takes to grade writing versus the time it doesn't take to grade multiple choice questions and true or false, especially since we have machines to do it. And that is, if the educational process is principally assessed and evaluated based on pieces of information, the implication that we are giving students is that everything has a right answer. And the purpose of education is knowing what that right answer is. The entire premise of our curriculum is the idea that education is the process of bringing truth to those who do not have it. And the way you effectively evaluate how good our education system is by testing students to find out how many of them know the right answers. But the hidden message there is that everything worth knowing has right answers. Not only that, but other people have them. It's just you that don't. The message is being sent is, I don't know the answer to something until somebody gives it to me. The one thing I know for sure is that I don't have it. And until some textbook gives it to me, or some curriculum guide gives it to me, or some state education board gives it to me, or a textbook gives it to me, until I know that this is true and that's false, this is right and that's wrong, this is white and that's black, until I'm given that kind of information, I don't have any way of knowing what truth is. So the whole idea of rationalism, the whole idea of people being able to use their own cognitive and intellectual skills to pursue truth and knowledge for themselves, is denied to the masses of our young people. Oh, it's given to the few. Those who are reared for positions of influence and power and decision-making. Those who are educated to be leaders. Those that some of the founders, like John Adams, defined as the so-called natural aristocracy. But if you accept the fact, as I do, that our republic absolutely demands a citizenry that is educated and able to think critically and able to pursue knowledge and truth for itself and able to weigh and evaluate different alternatives and make intelligent decisions, if you believe that that's what education needs to be, which is what I believe, then I would suggest to you that if our education system begins to do that, our republic will prosper. We will flourish because our people will flourish. And if we are floundering, it's because we are subjecting so many of our young people to a process of education that never gives them the opportunity to do any of that. And part of it is the ability to learn from dialogue and argument and counter-argument. Let me read this paragraph from this article. Argument is a more complex and challenging cognitive skill for students than other genres of reading and writing, such as exposition or narrative. Exposition is asking students to write and explain what the text says. Narrative is the process of putting in paragraph form, in written form, pieces of fact and information and truth that somebody else has given you. But cognitive thinking, argument, is something different. Taking a position and being able to draw on evidence to support that particular position and throwing it out there as a prospective truth into the marketplace of ideas. This is something quite different, and this is something quite, I believe, important. We looked yesterday at a short piece, a satire, on a person who played fast and loose with the content of the Constitution of the United States and believed that there were certain things in the Constitution that are not there, and believed certain things were not in the Constitution that are there. A person who drew most of their substantive information on the Constitution, not from the Constitution, from what people told him or her was in the Constitution. And the point it was extreme, but it was designed to make a point. When we come back in our second hour, I want to share with you an approach to the Constitution that is a lot more real and a lot more substantive and potentially a lot more dangerous than that. And I think it provides a perfect example of what it is that our students must be able to understand and, where necessary, challenge. Our education system must change to meet this challenge. When we come back, we will do that. We are at the top of the hour. You are listening to the Virtual Center on the Study of the United States Constitution. I'm Bill O'Brien, and after a 5-minute break, we'll be right back. Please stay with us.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and your host, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
This is Bill O'Brien here at the Virtual Center. I welcome you if you are just joining us, if you've been with us since the beginning of today's program. I want to thank you for staying with us, and I want to invite you to participate actively in our program by using the phone number we have for you, area code 304-658-3333. That's the number, and that'll get you on the air and give you an opportunity to share with other listeners your perception or your thinking about some of the issues and some of the topics that we are touching upon here at the Virtual Center. Again, 304-658-3333. And if you would like to email me directly on a particular issue, a particular point, and earlier in our program, for those of you who have just joined us, I kind of encouraged, I mentioned that we were pursuing both independent incorporation and 501c3 status for the Virtual Center so that we could actively pursue grant and public as well as private funding for the Virtual Center. And if you have something that you would like to contribute or offer, something substantive that you feel is worth saying and that we might use in order to explain to potential sources of funding as to what we're about here at the Virtual Center, and you believe it would help us, then I invite you to share that with us by sending me an email. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906, all one word, IEN, that is, at gmail.com. And what I will do is I will save these emails and these potential quotations, and then as we begin to apply for funding from various sources, once we acquire our 501c3 status, which will allow people who are willing to contribute to the Virtual Center to deduct their contributions from their taxes. And I think that's very, very important for us to do. So again, that's waobrien906@gmail.com, and the phone number, area code 304-658-3333. We were looking at the issue, some of the issues related to argumentation, and talking about its absence in our educational system and what that means. And it's a subject that we've touched on numerous times before, and I don't doubt one bit that we'll be touching on it over and over again in the future. I have to acknowledge up front, I've been an educator for better than a half a century. I believe in education. I have tremendous faith in the degree to which our future is determined by the quality of our education, that the education that we provide our people. I believe, as I've said many times, I believe that what many people refer to as American exceptionalism is not driven by what we've done or where we are. It's primarily to be explained by the potential where we are able to go. And I see education as being a critical ingredient in where it is that we are able to go. I wanted to share one other thing with you before getting to the particular issue that I made reference to before we took our break at the top of the hour. I wanted to share with you an article that was written in 2005. It appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education. The author was Frank Cioffi, C-I-O-F-F-I, Frank Cioffi, who is an assistant professor of writing and the director of the writing program at Scripps College. It's a beautiful piece that appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education in 2005 on argumentation. And basically, the title of his article is Argumentation in a Culture of Discord. I do not believe that the situation has changed since this article was first published on the 20th of May, 2005, in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And Cioffi's position is that one of the one of the failures of our education system, our inability to incorporate argumentation into it, is based on the idea that we really are not clear on what the educational and instructional benefits and value of argumentation are. We tend to see argument from what Chaffee says is a media perspective. We tend to look at argumentation principally from the position that there are two sides. Your job as a citizen is to pick one. You're either for gay marriage or against it, for abortion or for life, either for pulling a feeding tube or for not pulling a feeding tube. In other words, the assumptions that many people make when they talk about argument or argumentation is that it becomes an either-or situation, and we are asking people to pick one. You're either with us or against us. And part of the reason that media is responsible for this is because that's the way the media organizes its communication and presentations with the Republic. At that time, one of the most popular TV programs that had been on for many, many years was CNN's Crossfire. And it was based on the premise. It was canceled at that time after 23 years on the air. And the basic premise of Crossfire was to present two sides to a particular issue, and the idea is that the audience's job was to pick the right one. The missing element here is the ability of the listener, the citizen, to basically critique not just one but both of those, and not pick one or the other, but to develop one's own understanding of the issue based on substantive information provided in either or one or the other of the two positions. Being able to separate fact from opinion, substance from interpretation, and being able to put together your own position, paper, or argument on a particular subject, based on information you are able to draw from those who have opinionated, argumentative positions on it. We pretty much allow, according to Chaffee, we pretty much allow the Crossfire approach to education, media-defined terms about arguments, to determine the way our people approach different points of view. And, of course, what we have is a two-party system, kind of an either-or situation. One person referred to this as food fight journalism. And Chaffee uses this paragraph, which I think is very, very, very informative. Students typically don't want to attempt argument or take a controversial position to defend, probably because they've seen or heard enough of the media models, Bill O'Reilly and Coulter L. Franken, to name a few, and honestly are sick of them. This is what Chaffee refers to as food fight journalism. This is his alternative, and I'm quoting Frank Jaffe's article here. I propose that we teach students more about how intellectual discourse really works, about how it offers something exciting, yet how when it succeeds only in approaching understanding. Bluntly, he says, meaning is plainly potential, not answers. Philosophical and more generally argumentative discourse presents no irrefutable proofs, no indelible answers. In fact, the best writing of this kind tends not to answer but to raise questions, ones that perhaps the audience hadn't previously thought about. Or to put it in terms my college-age nephew uses, when you're writing argument, don't go for the slam dunk. And I think I cited that the other day. And he talks here about the value of counter-arguments. And he comes up with the following quote from John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. Many of you will be familiar with John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, where Mill asserts that 75% of an argument should consist of counter-argument. And further, that writers should not merely parrot these, but must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form, must feel the whole force of the difficulty which the true view of the subject has to encounter and dispose of. Presenting and empathizing with counter-arguments forces an author to go somewhere new, to modify an initial position into one more nuanced, more complex, more problematic, perhaps to one of greater potential. So the issue here is argument and counter-argument expands the knowledge of everybody, those who are participating in the debate as well as those who are able to listen to or to read the different positions in the particular debate. Everybody's understanding and everybody's knowledge of the subject at hand is enhanced and made broader and deeper as a result of the argument-counter-argument model. But the fact of the matter is, our education system is afraid of it. We are much more comfortable in our education system with the idea that education is the pursuit of truth, and successful education is when a student can say, quote, I got it, as if it was a product, as if we were consumers whose mind is not growing and expanding, but whose mind is being filled with pieces of information that we know and can trust are truth. And finally, Chaffee makes the point and says, my colleague makes this point, and I think it says it very well. Human beings, pork and beans, they're all the same. That is frightening. What we are essentially doing and calling argumentation is to repackage discourse as if it was product, as if it was a piece of information or truth that we can give somebody to memorize. The one thing we never do is acknowledge the ability of the individual student or the individual person to apply their own intellectual and cognitive skills to an issue and to come up with their own position on that. This is the value of primary source material. This is why I personally have become so committed to the idea of primary source materials in the teaching of history and civic education and all the rest of it. I believe that we have to get away from textbooks and instructors telling us what to believe and what's true. And we need to believe the people who really wrestled with these issues. We need to look at the different arguments they used. We need to weigh and evaluate and basically begin to put together and get our arms around many of these issues ourselves. When we do that, and when enough of our citizens are able to do it, we will flourish as a republic. And I would suggest to you that's the model that the founders were committed to. They didn't necessarily say it that way because many of them were struggling over the details. They were wrestling, they were weighing, they were throwing things out. They were arguing and counter-arguing with each other. That's why the letters are so informative and so incredibly important. What we have to do in order to understand our Constitution and the way we need to interpret it, what we need to do is look at it the way the founders looked at it. Not the answers that the founders reached, but rather recognized that in many cases, in many places, they were not sure either. They were weighing and they were looking for information and they were looking for additional insights, and they were struggling with some of these things. And the way we approach the founders, the way conservatives tend to approach the founders, as if the founders had the answers, they put it in the Constitution, and our job is to memorize it. And I would suggest to you that that is not true. I want to introduce you to an approach to American constitutionalism that is associated with the name Skousen. Clausen Skousen, Skousen. Skousen is an ex-FBI agent and anti-communist fighter in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, who wrote a book in 1981 called The 5,000-Year Leap. And in that book, he put together what he believed were the 28 key principles to understanding the nature of the American Republic. Glenn Beck referred to Skousen's book as the most influential in the development of his own political views. And when Skousen's book was republished, a new edition came out in 2009, Glenn Beck wrote the foreword, and the book became #1 on the Amazon.com bestseller list. Unlike what we looked at yesterday, which was satirical. What we're looking at today is real. This is what's going on in our country. This is what constitutionalism in America is about. This is what the Virtual Center is about. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, The 5,000-Year Leap, that book is, and this is a quote, an illustrated recipe for turning the United States into 50 little theocracies, each dictating morality according to its own religious ethics. These ethics, Skousen argues, should be transmitted through extensive Bible reading in public schools. Skousen's book advocates going back to Benjamin Rush's mode of education proper in a republic and the use of Scripture in our schools in order to educate our young. Princeton University historian Sean Willents, who's one of the most prominent constitutional historians in the nation, Sean Willents has criticized the accuracy of Skousen's work, disputing its claims in taxes on redistribution of wealth, etc., etc., etc. Skousen claims that the founders' motto for America was "In God We Trust." Willents describes the 5,000-Year Leap, and this is a quote, as a treatise that assembles selective quotations and groundless assertions to claim that the United States Constitution is rooted not in the Enlightenment, but in the Bible, and that the framers believed in minimal central government. He goes on, either proposition would have astounded James Madison, often described as the guiding spirit behind the Constitution. Madison, who rejected state-established religions, and like Alexander Hamilton, proposed a central government so strong that it could veto state laws. And then Skousen goes into the details of his 28 principles. I want to expose us here at the Virtual Center to these 28 principles. And as an introduction to them, I would like to say the following. These principles contain enough historical substance that they are believable. It becomes very difficult to separate substance from belief system here. And when you present this as fact to young people and students and American citizens who do not have the critical thinking skills necessary to be able to separate truth from falsehood in these principles, once you accept these principles as a package, as unquestioned truth, you can begin to see where so much of the controversy surrounding our Constitution today comes from. So let's look at the first principle. Quote, "The only reliable basis for sound government and just human relations is natural law." We know that the founders were incredibly knowledgeable about John Locke and about the state of nature and the whole idea of natural law. Natural law is based on man's reason. The reason that the state of nature was secure and stable and not that bad. It was not the Thomas Hobbes war of every man against every other man, which was his basis for justifying absolute government. But the idea of natural law as written by John Locke and as accepted by many of the founders is indeed a basis for sound government and just human relations. But then Skousen elaborates on that principle. Quote, "Natural law is God's law. There are certain laws which govern the entire universe. And just as Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, there are laws which govern in the affairs of men, which are the laws of nature and of nature's God." There is no question that that is in the Declaration of Independence. There is no question that Jefferson said that. But when you accept this principle of natural law, then if you accept the whole package of natural law and natural rights as suggesting that that's what government is all about, then you are basically buying into the concept of individualism rather than into the idea of community. You are not looking, you are excluding those aspects of John Locke where he talks about the commons. And he talks about man's responsibility in the state of nature to secure private property for himself, but only as much as he can use and as much as he needs. The rest needs to be left there for everybody else. Because every citizen in the state of nature is equal in their right to access to private property. Everybody has the right to the freedom necessary to acquire private property. In order for that to happen, it's absolutely essential that a few people not be allowed to take it all. But none of this appears in Skousen's first principle. So the basic argument is that natural law is God's law. John Locke said that reason is the voice of God in man, within man. That if you believe in a supreme being, in a creator, the element of the divine, the element of the creator is within all of us in our ability to think and reason and criticize and understand and know. Man has an obligation to use his mind in order to pursue truth. We are dealing instead with people who presume to tell us what truth is. And it's very dangerous. And I would suggest to you that that's what Cleon Skousen is doing in the 5,000-year leap, and that's what Glenn Beck is doing in his endorsement of the principles in the 5,000-year leap. Basically supporting the right of some people to tell other people what to believe and what's true and what they must know and what they should not know. So again, the first principle is not wrong, because if it was totally wrong, it wouldn't be viable. What makes it dangerous is that it's somewhat right. But it can only be right when people understand what the limitations and the ramifications of it are. And the only way we can know that is to apply our own critical thinking and intellectual skills to the issues. And in order to do that, we have to be educated in how to do it. And we live in a society which is afraid to educate us that way. And so here we are. That is principle number one. Jefferson in the Declaration did indeed suggest, talk about something called the laws of nature and of nature's God, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary, etc., etc. Okay. Principle number two. A free people cannot survive under a republican constitution unless they remain virtuous and morally strong. A free people cannot survive under a republican constitution unless they remain virtuous and morally strong. And then Skousen quotes Benjamin Franklin. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. Pretty powerful. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. There's no question that the founders believed that a popular government, a republic, required virtue in its citizens. There's no question that in 1776, at the time of independence, many of the founders believed that the virtue was there and that independence would bring it out, would bring it to a head. We also know that the Confederation period which followed independence punched holes in that balloon of optimism that existed in 1776, to the point that Hamilton and Madison and some of the other leaders began to see that we needed a major revision in the nature of Republican government in America. We needed a government that was strong enough and secure enough that it would preserve the stability that a republic required. And the only way to do it was to create a central government that was stronger than the states which comprised the Union. As long as the nation was organized under the Articles of Confederation around the principles of republicanism as defined by Montesquieu, the idea that a republic had to be small because only a small republic would allow citizens, elected representatives, to know the needs and wants of citizens. And if government was to fulfill the needs and wants and the will of its citizens, then the citizens had to be able to express their will to the representatives. The nature of republicanism, as defined in that model, in the Articles of Confederation model, that view of republicanism suggests that government's responsibility is to take its marching orders from the will of the people. The Constitution of the United States was written in order to blow that model out of the water and to create a system which the people, the majority faction, could not control, which would, in effect, put power back in the hands of the minority. Skousen doesn't talk about any of that. Once you understand that, then you can weigh the validity of his principle number two. A free people cannot survive under a republican constitution unless they remain virtuous and morally strong. Nowhere in there is there a suggestion that there are different definitions of republicanism. Nowhere in there is there an effort to explain the difference between republicanism under the Confederation and republicanism under the new Constitution. There's nothing in there about the transition of power that is involved in ratification. There's nothing in there to suggest what ratification of the Constitution means in terms of the people's ability, the people's consent to be governed by the system that they are ratifying. The Constitution is being ratified not by the states which comprise the Union, but by the people of the states. And Madison makes it very clear as to why that is an important distinction, but Skousen does not. So what these principles, we've only looked at two so far, and what these principles do is create an opportunity for Skousen and Glenn Beck and other people who are so inclined to tell us what the meaning of these principles is, each of these principles is. Principle number 3. The most promising method of securing a virtuous people is to select virtuous leaders. Think about that. The most promising method of securing a virtuous people is to elect virtuous leaders. What is the implication in that principle of the relationship between leaders and followers? Isn't the definition of virtue in that principle the willingness of the people to do exactly as their leaders suggest they must do? Madison said this in the Federalist Papers over and over again. The success of the Republic is not going to be determined so much by the leaders that the people elect. The quality of the people, the quality of the leaders that people elect, the elected representatives, is going to be driven principally by the caliber and knowledge of the people involved. Very, very important principle. Here's a quote from Sam Adams in principle number 3. Quote, "Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. He, therefore, is the truest friend to the liberty of his country who tries most to promote its virtue, and who will not suffer a man to be chosen into any office of power and trust who is not a wise and virtuous man." Sam Adams made that statement. So what Skousen is doing is selectively choosing quotations from founders to reinforce and support the principles. Let me explain exactly the difference here, because this is critical. Are the principles the product of an analysis of the sources? Are the principles derived from what the sources say, or are the principles what the author wants them to be, and then you go back and you find quotations from the founders like Sam Adams and Benjamin Franklin which support the principles you want the people to accept? I would suggest to you that's the difference between honest research and dishonest research. The emphasis in Principle 3 is not on the ability of the virtue of the people so much as on the ability and the virtue of the leaders. And the assumption is, if you have the right leaders, everything will fall into place and you'll take care of themselves. I would suggest to you that that is a formula or a recipe for autocracy, for the rule of the few, of the wealthy. And it is listed in this particular writing as the third principle on which our republic is based. Principle number 4. Without religion, the government of a free people cannot be maintained. Think about that. Without religion, the government of a free people cannot be maintained. Quotation from George Washington. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Let us be careful, that Washington is saying, let us be very careful about the idea that there can be morality except by anyone other than the religious. Let me stop there. Let's just put the first 4 principles together. The only reliable basis for sound government and just human relations is natural law. A free people cannot survive under a republican constitution unless they remain virtuous and morally strong. The most promising method of securing a virtuous people is to select virtuous leaders. Without religion, the government of a free people cannot be maintained. Just those 4. There are 28 principles to the 5,000-year leap. These are just the first 4. If you put them together, what is the meaning? The meaning is that all sound government and just human relations are based on natural law. Natural law is based on God's law. The greatest requirement in a republic is a virtuous people. And the virtue of the people is dependent on the virtue of their leaders. And the only leaders who can be defined as moral are religious people. In a society, in a constitution where the First Amendment commits the nation to religious freedom, what does that say? What do those principles say? Only the religious can be moral. Only the religious can have virtue. Only the religious can be trusted leaders. The only way you can have a virtuous people is if they follow virtuous leaders. And the only way you can have virtuous leaders is to have religious leaders. And the only way to preserve Republican government is for the people to remain virtuous and morally strong. And the only way they can remain virtuous and morally strong is to follow leaders who are virtuous and morally strong, and the only ones who are religious people. I would suggest to you that these are not the principles of the American Republic. These are the kinds of principles that led to the creation of the American Republic. And that the founders of this nation did not put together the Constitution of the United States to enact this, but to make sure that this never happens. And we are living in a world where substantial numbers of prominent people feel comfortable to use the media and use technology in such a way that they would impose and indoctrinate this view on the citizens of this republic. And it is absolutely not only disgraceful, it is extremely dangerous. We have got to begin to educate our people to the point that they can begin to see the flaws in this rationalism and the dangers in this kind of a system. We have only looked at 4 so far. And what makes them even more dangerous is because every one of the principles is supported by a quotation from one of the founders. It doesn't mean the only way that you can know what George Washington really believed about these issues is to go through everything that George Washington wrote and talked about and discussed in order to come to your assessment or your own understanding of where Washington stood in some of these issues. And the fact of the matter is, most of us aren't sure about these issues. And many of the founders were not sure. So consequently, if you look at the primary sources, if you look at the writings of the founders, you will find that oftentimes they contradict each other. They seem to contradict each other. They seem to speak out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. What's going on here? And I would suggest to you the answer is that these are real people, real human beings struggling with the same kinds of questions that all of us continue to struggle with. And for somebody to come along and claim that he or she knows what they believed and then go through their writing and pull out, cherry pick the sources in such a way that you find quotations which will support the principles that you want the people to believe the founders were about is extremely dangerous and extremely clever. If you want to read volumes where this stuff is put into practice, read the volumes of American history written by William Bennett, the former Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. Bennett's history of the United States is based to a large degree on many of these principles. And his textbook is just that. It is a textbook written from this perspective, citing quotations and sources where the research, the evidence is cherry-picked in such a way that you cannot come away from this without believing that the founders did really believe that this was the kind of republic that they were creating here. And I would suggest to you that we have looked at quotations and sources which create the sense that this is exactly not the kind of republic that the founders set out to create. Principle number 5, it continues. It gets better. Principle number 5, all things were created by God. Therefore, upon him all mankind are equally dependent, and to him they are equally responsible. Everything is created by God. All mankind are equally dependent upon God. In that sense, we are all equal. They are equally dependent. Therefore, we're all equal in that we're all children of God. And therefore, it is to God that we are equally responsible. But the only way we can be virtuous and sustain the republic is to follow the leaders who must be religious people who believe only this. And here's the follow-up or the explanatory paragraph to principle number 5. The American founding fathers considered the existence of the Creator as the most fundamental premise underlying all self-evident truth. They felt a person who boasted he or she was an atheist had just simply failed to apply his or her divine capacity for reason and observation. So basically, Skousen, in principle number 5, openly criticizes atheists as being deficient in their understanding because they have failed to apply God's divine capacity for reason and observation to the issues. And it's absolutely vital here that you go back to the previous principle, number 4, which suggests that the only people that can be moral are religious people. And the only way that we can have virtue in society is to have virtuous leaders. And the only virtuous leaders are religious people. I would suggest to you that these 5 principles fly in the face of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. And I don't know what to say. I don't want to be responsible for telling people what to believe. I just want you to react to the principles and see the principles as yourself. Number 6, principle number 6. All mankind are created equal. In principle number 5, Skousen has told us that equality depends on the fact that we are all equally dependent upon God. Therefore, number 6 is all mankind are created equal. And here's Skousen's elaboration of principle number 6. The founders knew that in these 3 ways all mankind are theoretically treated as 1. Equal before God, 2. Equal before the law, 3. Equal in their rights. And if you remember, in principle number 1, the only reliable basis for sound government and just human relations is natural law, going back to the state of nature. So what this says is that the founders knew that all mankind are equal before God, equal before the law, and equal in their rights. And you can begin to see the basis for what those who argue that the Bible and Christianity are the model for the American Republic, and that the whole history of the nation and the intent of the founders needs to be written around that particular principle. Principle number 7. The proper role of government is to protect equal rights, not provide equal things. Please stop here. We are at 52 minutes after the hour. The proper role of government is to protect equal rights, not provide equal things. Is this not a statement of commitment to the idea of free principle, of equal opportunity, but not equal result? People have the right to pursue their own self-interest, but they do not have the right to expect to acquire the same amount as other people. This justifies wealth, it justifies success, and it basically suggests that these are natural rights that come from the state of nature and come from God. Therefore, by implication, these principles deny the right of government to manage society, provide for the public interest, or, as Theodore Roosevelt told us in his New Nationalism speech, find ways to alter or redistribute wealth in such a way that you preserve the existence of the society, of the community, of the republic. Principle number 7 is license to exploit. And the proper role of government is to protect that freedom. And that's what James Madison said in Federalist Number 10. The major cause of factions throughout history has been the unequal distribution of property. And the principal role of government is to preserve that fact and to preserve that inequality. And then Skousen goes on and clarifies that and says, the founders recognized that the people cannot delegate to their government any power except that which they have the lawful right to exercise themselves. You, as an individual, do not have the power to take or invade the property rights of anybody else. And this statement says that the founders recognized that the people cannot give government the power to take property from those who have it any more than the people themselves have the right to take property from others. The result is that this denies the right of government to redistribute wealth. This denies the right of the people to tax and use the taxing power for issues of redistribution. It denies government the right to take care of the poor. It surely denies John Locke's definition of charity, which is the right of everybody to take what they need from the commons, which is what existed in Locke's state of nature but does not exist in this one. And on and on and on. That is principle number 7. And can I close? It's 56 minutes after the hour. Let me close with number 8. I won't make comment. I'll just put it out there. And you can think about it until we get together again. Principle number 8. Mankind are endowed by God with certain unalienable rights, straight out of the Declaration. Mankind are endowed by God with certain unalienable rights. And then the explanation from Skousen. Those rights, then, which God and nature have established, and are therefore called natural rights, such as are life and liberty, need not the aid of human laws to be more effectually invested in every man than they are. Neither do they receive any additional strength when declared by the municipal or state laws to be inviolable. On the contrary, no human legislation has power to abridge or destroy them, unless the owner of the right shall himself commit some act that amounts to a forfeiture. And this is from Blackstone. Mankind are endowed by God with certain unalienable rights. Thank you for being with us. We're at 57 minutes after the hour, and I'm going to leave Bob Kincaid time to fire things up and get ready for his program here on the Head On Radio Network. You've been listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution. I'm Bill O'Brien. I hope you have a wonderful day, rest of the day. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. And I hope that you'll be able to join us when we resume conversation here at the Virtual Center the first of next week. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you so very much for listening. Please be safe.